In this example, we look at a really meaty and difficult part of setting up beautiful, pretty HTML pages with CSS. And that is, how do we lay out an HTML page the way we want it to look? And by layout, I mean, how do we decide which logical unit belongs where? To the top of the page, to the left of the page, to the right of the page? How do we get things to center in a page? All of these questions will be answered in this section. In order to understand the layout of an HTML page, you need to know how does the browser render the HTML elements on a page. Browser rendering in HTML has a certain flow to it. It's a well-defined flow. And the way that flow works is like this. Imagine this is a browser window, what you see on screen. So this is the visible portion of the browser. The elements within the HTML, which you've set up using HTML tags, and you've seen a lot of examples of those, are parsed by the browser and understood by the browser. It knows what a body tag means. It knows what a header means. And then it begins laying it out. Layout flows from the left to the right in a browser window. So it looks at elements and it starts laying it out from the left to the right. Once it's reached the rightmost portion of the window, it's reached the rightmost margin, it will then move on downwards and then again start laying out the elements from the left to the right. So the browser flow, the completely normal flow of a browser without CSS, is from the left to the right and from top to bottom. Now, this left to right and top to bottom only works when the elements themselves allow themselves to be laid out from left to right. Elements have to be willing to sit next to each other. Often you have elements which cause a line break. Whenever the browser sees an element such as an H3, any header, a paragraph, or a div, these are elements which have line breaks, which introduce line breaks. So what the browser does is introduce a line break at the start of the element and at the end of the element when the tag of that element is closed. So whenever the browser sees a div, for example, it will move it to a new line. So there'll be a line break before the div and then there'll be a line break after the div tag is closed. Again, I've not taken CSS into account yet. So the browser lays out the elements from left to right unless there is a line break element, in which case it moves the entire element to a new line. This flow from left to right and top to bottom is the regular flow of HTML in a browser. This is not taking into account any of the CSS. We'll be talking about using CSS to figure out where to position things in just a minute. But just with HTML elements, all it cares about is, can I fit it on the right hand side till the right margin? If yes, keep placing elements one after the other. If it's an element that requires a line break, just place it on a new line. That's all the browser does. Now, this is something we can manipulate using CSS. And that is what layouts are all about. This normal flow of the browser is what you want to manipulate to get the web page to look like you want it to look. Understanding how a browser renders a page is very important to understand how you can use CSS layouts to affect this rendering. Browser rendering flows from left to right. As it sees elements, it tries to place it next to each other one after the other from left to right till it reaches the right margin. Once it reaches the right margin, then the flow is from top to bottom, right? Just like how you would write on a page. You read the right margin and then you move one line downwards. The browser reads the element on an HTML page from the top to the bottom. It reads elements one after the other from the top of the HTML page you've defined to the bottom. As it reads the elements from the top to bottom, it places it on the basis of this left to right, top to bottom flow. The browser figures out the width of each element as it places it from left to right. If there is no room for an element on a line because we are close to the right edge of the browser, then that element is placed on the next line. This is our top to bottom flow. This is the reason why when you resize a browser window, all the elements shift. You must have noticed it. If you resize the browser window, often elements which are next to each other will now be one below another. That's because the right margin you have made narrower. So let's look at two layouts for a browser. So here is a browser window and it's kind of got a broad width and a narrow height. It's not very tall, but it's broad. And there is another layout which is more squarish. The width is narrower and it's taller. Let's say this was your page. You have the images laid out one next to another till the right margin has been reached. Now, you've made the margin narrower. Take a look at how the text flows. Text has moved to the second line, and one of the images for which there was no room on the very right of the page has moved to the next line. The browser has flowed the elements on the basis of the space that it has available. Part of the text has moved to the next line and one image has moved to the next line because there was no room for that image to the very right of the page. This is the default browser rendering flow. Now that we've understood how HTML lays out elements by default, we are ready to tackle CSS, which will allow us to specify how we want the page to render. The example we are going to work with is the Lunicorn homepage, where we want to talk about the instructors and show a few courses that we have available. This is the HTML of the Lunicorn homepage. There's a lot of it there, don't worry, we'll be going through it in some detail. This is the CSS that's applied to get a certain look and feel for this particular Lunicorn homepage. However, we haven't done anything about the positioning of the elements. The CSS has been used purely to give the look and feel in terms of the background color, font, etc. So we are designing a simple course page for Lunicorn, and we are going to use positioning events, which will allow us to lay out the HTML exactly like how we want to. This HTML combined with the CSS that you see in front of you, which you'll see in the example code that's available for download along with this lecture, gives you an HTML CSS page or a web page which looks like this. This is what the Lunicorn page looks like right now. But we want to position things a little differently. We'll look at how we can use CSS to do that. Let's understand this page in some detail before we move on to positioning elements. This is the basic structure of the HTML. We haven't included all the content because the content is just text. Just understand and parse the basic structure of an HTML. There is a header on top, there is a paragraph of text, and then there is a div which holds a whole number of images, and then there is a footer at the very bottom. This HTML along with CSS gives you this page on the right. This HTML represents the entire page that you see on screen. This HTML lies within the body tag, and this is the CSS that we've applied to the body tag. We've said that we want the background color to be beige. We want to use the font family Geneva, and if that's not available, we want to use the sans serif font. We want the color of the text to be dim gray, and we want no extra margins. So that's our CSS. Note how the elements flow into their position one after the other. Every HTML element is available one after the other. Just observe that. Zooming into the individual elements, note that there is one big div which has the class CSS class applied to it called content. Content holds the header, the text about the author, and all the images. So it holds everything except the footer. Content only has a little bit of padding on the left so that it's not flush against the left of the browser window. That's all that content has, and it's the logical unit which includes everything in the page except the footer. Within the content, the first element is the header, which simply says about Loonycon, indicating the information is about Loonycon. This is the heading of this entire page. Nothing really fancy here. We don't apply any extra CSS for the header. This is the browser default style. After the header comes a paragraph about the authors of Loonycon. So there is a brief description of all the authors of Loonycon and their experience, etc. The only CSS that we've applied to this page via the author-about class is that its width is 600 pixels. It's a fixed width paragraph which has information about the author. So basically the text in that particular paragraph will not go beyond 600 pixels. After the author about section comes a logical unit called the navigation bar. And this contains a whole bunch of images to the courses that Loonycon offers. A small sampling of courses that Loonycon offers. These images should generally be links, but for simplicity's sake, we've not made them links yet. That's not important for this particular example. However, typically these images would be links which would lead to those courses on Udemy. So this is a sample of author courses. Note that it's entirely within a div which has the navigation dash bar CSS style applied to it. There is no specific style on this yet. We'll come to that. Within the navigation bar, we have for every course a course image and the course title. The course image is a div which is a logical unit containing the image. That's because we want. Why do we use a div? Remember, image is an inline element and we want the course image up to appear above the title. That is why we have the div. We align the image using text-align to the center. The center of that div. The div has a width of 200 pixels, as you can see in the course-image CSS class, and the image lies at the center of those 200 pixels. We have aligned the image to the center of that HTML element, HTML div element. Yes, text align can also apply to images. Text align can be used to center align horizontally any content in a div. The course title specifies what that course is. It's just under the image, and that is also center aligned. We use text align center to center align the course title as well. The other stuff in the course title div, you can see the other styles you can see right there on screen. We make sure that the course title appears in black. We have a little bit of padding and so on. And lastly, at the very bottom, outside of the content div, we have the footer. The footer is supposed to have a whole bunch of links. Note that we haven't really added the links in for simplicity's sake so that the HTML doesn't get out of control, and it's not really needed for this example. Typically, you would add links to different pages for contact us, location, etc. So the footer is a paragraph. It has the CSS style footer applied to it. It has a specific background color, has some padding, and each link in the footer has a specific style applied to it as well. We haven't made them href links, just a heads up there. But that's what you would typically do if this were a real page.